We are currently in Ackworth, Georgia. We finally reached our destination.
My name is Peter Burke Jr. 4 years ago, I joined a unique organization that had very peculiar ideas.
And we are just a few minutes away from King Richard's house.
It was December 2010. I was 20 years old and I was reading a website called the Distributist Review, a place where people post articles critiquing both capitalism and socialism, trying to inject Catholic social teaching into the marketplace with an idea called distributism. I came across an article entitled Monarchy and the American Constitution. In it, the author defended the idea that monarchy should still be considered a relevant form of government and taken more seriously. I scrolled down to the comments section to see people's reaction to this, where I discovered a post by a man named Richard, who said that he had written a constitution for a distributist Catholic nation of his design. I was very curious about this, so I clicked on the link that he provided, read his constitution, and from that moment on, my life took an entirely different direction. The name of his organization is called the Kingdom of Edan, an attempt by individuals and families to create a new country from the ground up based upon Catholic principles. 4 years ago, I became a citizen of this new nation, but I wanted to get a greater perspective about what I was actually getting myself into. So I packed my bags, hopped in my car, and drove south down to Ackworth, Georgia, where Richard and his family were living. This will be the very first time I ever met my king, or anybody else who's actually in the Kingdom of Edan. And this will be the first time I met face-to-face someone else who is part of the smallest nation.
I'm Richard Louis Maximilian Stump. I'm the guy who founded this crazy enterprise about 15 years ago now, almost 16 years ago. The project is about the citizens being citizens. One way of thinking about Edan is as a non-territorial state. Now, if you think of the gypsies are a people and they exist. We call them a nation. They don't have any territory they control, and yet you think of the Roma people as a people. You say the same thing about the Kurds until very recently. The Kurds existed in a number of other states, but they had no control over those states. But the Kurds are still a distinct people, they have their own language, they have their own culture. Those are non-state actors or non-state groups. Edan is the other side of that coin. We're a non-territorial state.
Edan is what's called a micronation. I wanted Richard to explain exactly what the Kingdom of Edan was, and explain a little bit more on micronationalism to gain a better understanding of who we actually are and what we're trying to do.
Micronation is a very broad term that describes a huge range of different concepts and ideas at the same time. For example, Andorra, which is a principality that's been around for hundreds of years, is called a micronation. Sealand, a gun platform in the North Atlantic that won a court case in England, called a micronation. Molossia, who's a good friend of mine, who likes to dress up as an admiral and has flags as property in Arizona, is a micronation.
I had heard a term that the king used before called New Country Project to explain what Edan was.
A new country project, the idea of making a new country from scratch. And as a matter of fact, Americans in particular should be very open to this idea. The idea of, we don't like any of the nations that exist, let's make a new one. That's really at the heart and soul of Edan. We want to make a better country. We're building a better country. A nation that is actually built upon the core principles of the virtues and of justice that came before. In a positive manner, we're talking about a place where you will have more of a positive justice in your life, more of a positive freedom. Not freedom of, well, there's nobody to tell me what to do, but the freedom of, I'm able to do the right and moral thing.
All of this talk about theory was very enlightening for me, but I wanted to get to know Richard a little bit more personally. So after a few discussions, I found out that he actually served for quite some time in the United States military.
So I enlisted in the military at the age of 17, went off and had a wonderful career for 8 years. Basic training, and then I went to the Defense Language Institute where I studied Farsi. I basically would listen to the enemy broadcasts on the radio and translate them. I was stationed at Fort Bragg for all my permanent party. I was with the 519th Military Intelligence Battalion there. Went to the Persian Gulf with them, for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Was attached briefly to the French Foreign Legion during Desert Storm. Returned home and decided not to re-enlist again. My first enlistment had been to get a guaranteed slot in Germany, and instead I'd spent my time in the Middle East. So I went on and got my education.
One thing that stuck out in my mind as he was telling me about his time overseas. How exactly did a patriotic American veteran transform himself into a self-styled king, trying to start his own Catholic country?
There was actually an epiphany moment. When I was looking at what sort of structure we should have for Edan, I started looking through just history books on what nations lasted the longest and were the most stable, had the fewest civil wars, those sorts of things. And it came again and again to what I would call a limited monarchy, not an absolute monarchy, a monarch where they had some sort of drag on their power, whether it's a constitution or a strong aristocracy or some combination of those things. Kingdoms lasted for thousands upon thousands of years and met the needs of the world very, very well. There have been past experiences and experiments with democracy and republics, and they've all collapsed in relatively short order. As a matter of fact, one of the very first presidents of the United States famously said, "There has never been a democracy that did not exhaust and destroy itself," shortly before he became president, actually. The terror of the French Revolution, up until the terrible wars in the second half of the 20th century, you see a great deal of volatility in democracies. So I decided to go with an older model.
One of the main reasons I joined the Kingdom of Edan is because I saw it as a Catholic effort. So I asked the king precisely, how exactly is the Kingdom of Edan a Catholic movement?
Well, Catholicism at its heart is a monarchist group. We do not have the feast of Christ the President, and we do not celebrate the feast of Christ the Prime Minister. It's Christ the King. We're trying to mirror what's going on with Christ in a very secular way, in a very limited way, because we're only human. That's why the church is structured the way it is. The church is not a democracy. It never will be a democracy. Edan is Catholic in a number of ways. There's the official way, which is very simply, the king must be Catholic. He must raise his children to be Catholic. He must marry a Catholic or somebody who's converted. But most importantly, if you look at the Constitution, the guiding principles behind the church, the kingdom, are the church's principles, the virtues, the 7 virtues, the 4 cardinal virtues and the 3 theological virtues. The guiding principles behind this are the same principles in your life that bring us closer to God.
One thing that may not seem to make sense for people is how Richard and other Edanians seem to critique a lot of modern systems. So I asked the king why he thought democracy just wasn't the way to go.
Well, I think democracy at its heart is a simple failure to recognize something about reality. And that's this. Hierarchies exist, right? There's always a hierarchy. We talk a lot about equality, we talk a lot about these sorts of things, but there's an old saying that equality only exists in the graveyard. Now that doesn't mean you and I aren't equal in rights. I'm a king, you're not. That doesn't mean that our human rights are any different. I don't have more of a right to life than you do. I don't have more of a right to justice than you do. I don't have more of a right to anything than you do, even though we're in different positions within society. So when we talk about equality, when we try to spread that out to say there is no hierarchy, we're rejecting the fact that hierarchies are natural and exist everywhere. So I think that all we're seeing with democracy is the system is based upon a false concept that it doesn't really matter who's in charge as long as people pick them. It doesn't seem to be working out.
One thing I understood about the Kingdom of Edan is that our goals were very, very lofty. So I asked the king exactly what we plan to do as a kingdom, and how do we go about attracting new citizens.
At this point, we just wait for people to come to us from the blogs, from the internet, from people I meet in person, people that other Edanians meet. We're just going to make sure that more people see us and come to us. We're not going to go out and say, you should be one of us. We're simply saying, here's what we're doing, here's what we want to do, and if you're interested, here's how you contact us.
We attended a lovely Latin Mass service at St. Francis de Sales Church. But not only that, I was able to meet up with a fellow citizen. His name is Floyd, or rather, Baron Floyd. He was one of the first people to be elevated to the aristocracy in the Kingdom of Edan.
I go by Kurt Anthony Isaac Jogues Floyd. I'm a baron in the kingdom, and as soon as I have any sort of property of my own, which is a few years down the road, I will be a member in the nobility. I'm probably, since I am the first landed hereditary noble, I will sit on the council. Well, I first heard about Edan standing right there, actually. The two main things for me were the distributism and the non-territoriality of it. It's this concept of a nation with a capital N, where you have a people that are a nation that aren't necessarily a country. You don't have clearly defined borders, but there is a nation there. That's really an innovative idea and something that needs to exist now because the world is so cross-pollinated, almost. that I think that's something that can really work effectively.
You know, when I speak about the Kingdom of Edan to my fellow Catholics, they're often very confused. One thing they like to say is, why even bother with it? There's plenty of other things Catholics can do in order to change the world. Why start your own country?
There's so many really good people trying to do so many good things to change things. But one thing you have to understand is, and this is something that pains me, is when I see a fair number of Catholics in the United States throwing their weight behind one political party or another and saying this is how we're going to help be better Catholics or change the country. I'm sorry, but they're the groups playing by the rules that got us here, or even making it worse. There's a lot of good people doing a lot of good work, but we're treading the same ground again and again. Didn't these groups exist 100 years ago? Yes. Have things gotten worse? Yes. Do I fault those groups for things getting worse? Certainly not. But let's try something new.
One thing I remembered that as a Catholic, I need reassurance that I'm in no way overstepping the bounds of church teaching. How exactly does the Kingdom of Edan coincide with church teaching?
We're always encouraged to build things new and to make things that are Catholic, to be organizations. As a matter of fact, Rerum Novarum tells us to gather together in organizations amongst ourselves where we can share not just our labor, not just our thoughts, but also our faith. Because the most Catholic thing you can do in the world is to live as an example of Catholicism for other people to see and emulate. As families, we're called to do that very thing. What's the best way to evangelize? The best way to evangelize is not to shout from the street corner. It's to live a good life and have people say, I want to be like him. I want to build a nation full of Catholics and Orthodox and anyone else who's of goodwill and is willing to be virtuous. And I want people to look and say, who are these people? I want to be like them. There's a lot of moving parts here, but eventually all the important tasks of any true government, aid to the people, educational aid to those who need it, etc., even insurance, I would like to be able to provide.
I hope we can sort of coalesce as a nation a little bit more. I mean, we don't really have any big resources, but we have people and we have, they have skills. So I think things like that, just pushing in little areas, making small changes everywhere is what we can do for the best thing in the next few years.
So after I was finished speaking with Baron Floyd, the king took me aside and said that he wanted to give me something very important. He wanted to give me a title of knighthood.
I was just now recently fully knighted. I was pulled aside by His Majesty. He says, I want to take you aside with just you and my son. So I knelt down and in sort of a prayerful fashion, and he put his hands over my hands. It was just in the middle of the parking lot, and he said, this is where several other knights of Edan have been knighted, and this is where you'll be knighted. And he asked me if I would be a part of this order. I'm officially now a knight of the Kingdom of Edan, and I'm really excited for the future.
Most people view this entire project as incredibly crazy. So I asked the king and the baron to give me their perspective on exactly what they thought when people said, you're crazy.
What I usually get is, you're delusional. Yeah, maybe. I personally may be delusional. I'm not sure about that. I wouldn't know if I'm delusional.
I've told a few people, and some people think I'm joking. Some of them think it's... a couple of them have kind of taken me seriously and looked at me like I'm crazy. I mean, they eventually kind of accept it, and they can't really figure out anything to say. So it makes them think, at least. That's good.
Is it really that radical an idea? I mean, when I'm faced with this, I ask people, is it truly that radical an idea? In a nation that's seen the birth of South Sudan and has a number of cities in the east of Ukraine right now with their own militias doing their own thing. Is the concept of somebody doing that without guns and artillery really that outrageous? How would you like to see a new country built from the ground up that doesn't involve violence, ever, but it just involves people realizing, I have something in common with these people. I want to share what I have in common with these people, because together, these people and I are going to do something wonderful and show the world how you can build a better nation.
It can often be said that if you're an American and you critique American national beliefs, you can be labeled as unpatriotic or even a traitor. So I asked this former U.S. soldier, now turned king, if he's a traitor.
What's more American than making your own country? Right? America is the country founded upon rejecting legitimate authority. It is. It's not the only country, but it's famously one of the first, biggest, and loudest. And besides, remember, I have nothing against America. America has been wonderful to me. I'm very proud of having served the United States of America in its military. I've earned ribbons in combat zones for the United States. The United States has done a lot of good things for a lot of people all around the world. I'm not telling anybody you have to leave the United States. I don't require citizens to give up any citizenship. I certainly would never tell them to do things like, oh, betray, your trust, break your vows to other people. Certainly not. That's not what this is about. This is about pointing out that things can be better than they are. If you want to improve America, improve America. If you want to improve Germany, France, wherever, go right ahead. But if you want to show that those systems are flawed, those systems could be better, if there's a better way of doing things, come talk to me.
And so that was it. I met with the king, visited with his family, attended his church, and became a knight. But there was one more thing I had to get off my chest as I was making the long drive home back to Ohio. I found the whole experience very interesting. I had some very, very good conversations with His Majesty Richard, his family, and a few of his friends. In spite of our humble beginnings, that perhaps many of the citizens are still trying to figure out what it means to be an Edanian. One thing hasn't changed. I am still an Edanian, and I intend to be an Edanian for the rest of my life. I hope people can understand where we are coming from, and I hope they can understand what we believe in and decide for themselves what they think of it.
Take the time to research for yourself. Find out if I'm right or wrong, right, about these. These are really important things. These are very critical things. You're being ruled by somebody. Everybody in the world is being ruled by somebody. Do you really understand who? Do you understand the system that's being used to rule you? And do you understand the implications of what it's going to lead to? That's one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves. Who's ruling us? How? Why? And what's going to be the end result? That's what I'm asking for you. And I do hope that everyone that watches this keeps me in their best wishes.